Well, welcome back to Daily Bible with Chris. Glad you're here for kind of our part two, our more of our commentary Bible study breakdown of the 5 chapters we read today. So thank you for being a part of this. Earlier today, we posted and read the first 5 chapters in the book of Job. So as I say often with these videos, if you've not already either read those 5 chapters or watched the previous video, I would encourage you to stop this video or pause this video and either go back and watch that earlier video from today, or to open your Bible and read the first 5 chapters in Job. That way you'll have a better understanding of what we're talking about. While I'm at that, I'll also remind you, if you've not already subscribed to the channel, if you would hit that subscribe button. Doesn't cost you anything. And that way you can get notifications of daily content as I post that. And if you like the video, give it a like. That does help the channel grow a little bit and get it out into the algorithm. But yeah, the book of Job is a very interesting book. It is primarily because of the way it's written and some of the terminology that's used in the book. Most scholars believe Job is the oldest written book in the Bible, that it predates Genesis, the Torah, that this man Job predates Moses by quite a bit of time in his life. It's possible he was a contemporary of Abraham. It's very likely that he was, or maybe even a little later with Jacob and Esau, but he's around that time frame of, as best I've found and understand, of the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so somewhere in there we have this man Job, and we're not 100% sure of an exact time frame, but it's definitely older probably than the Torah, than the first 5 books, the Pentateuch, because of just the way it's written, the language in which it's written, and some of the terminology that's used. It's also considered to be a book of poetry because most of the book is dialogue. It's questions and debate and conversation back and forth outside of the first 2 chapters. The rest of the majority of the rest of the book is conversation between Job, his 3 friends, and God ultimately. And so it's very interesting with that. And so it's very poetic in how it's written. And so we have this man Job that's living before as a follower of God, of Yahweh, prior to the Levitical law and such. So we see that Job is a very successful man. This is going to be kind of the opposite. I think I said this earlier today in the video with the Bible reading. Most of the time we read these rags to riches, poor person becomes rich. This is going to be a case where a rich man becomes very poor, very destitute, and then right at the end, God's going to bless him right toward, at the end of the book. Who the author of the book is, we don't know that either. It's possible it was written by Job long after the events had happened. That's possible, but we really don't know who the actual author of the book of Job is. So, but we accept it as scripture, and it's a great story, and there's a lot of first person accounts, and then there's some things happening in the heavens, happening at God's throne, that obviously could have only been written down through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, inspiring whoever the author is to not only know what Job was saying and the dialogue, what's being said, but also to know what's happening, that Job, obviously at the time these events happened, didn't know that there was a conflict going on in heaven over him specifically. And so we see this man Job is in a country called Uz. Not to be confused, it's not the country of Oz. This is Uz. And it says he's a man of complete integrity who feared God and turned away from evil. He had 10 children, 7 sons, 3 daughters, and then he had a bunch of livestock, a bunch of wealth. He was considered the greatest man in that area. And it tells us in chapter 1 that his sons would often they would take turns having banquets in their homes, and they would call for their sisters to come and join. So you learn real quick that they're a very close-knit family. They like spending time with each other and celebrating and having these times together. Could have been birthday parties or other times to get together, whatever it might have been. And then we see Job not condemning what they're doing, because obviously they're enjoying themselves. There's wine drinking, there's things going on. But he does burn an offering to the Lord, it's just in case his children did something, in case maybe in their revelry they cursed God in some way, and so he's trying to make appeasement to God for them again, not really understanding it. And so you can almost see it like today you have a child that's doing what's wrong, or they're gone somewhere, or maybe you find out they're at a party somewhere and you don't want them to make bad decisions, and you just go to the Lord and just pray and say, Lord, just watch over them, get them out of that place, forgive them, Lord. They know not what they do. That kind of a prayer that probably many parents have prayed for their children. Obviously, ultimately, each person is responsible for their own sin and confession. But sometimes we parents will say, Lord, just forgive them, blot it out, cover it over, ignore their foolishness. And so we kind of see that. And then the scene goes from Job's family. We go to the throne room of heaven, or the throne room of God. And it tells us that there was one day when the sons of God's a terminology for angelic beings, that they had to come and basically present themselves to God to give a report. And we see that Satan is among them. So notice this. Oftentimes we have a tendency to want to put Satan and God on the same, like they're the yin and yang, right? The equal God of good and the God of evil. But Satan is nothing more than a fallen angel. And he is limited. He is not omniscient and omnipresent and all these different attributes that God has, right? Satan can only be in one place at one time. He can't travel, he doesn't know he can read, like, but he doesn't know the future like God knows. God knows the end from the beginning and the beginning from the end. He knows everything that's going to happen. Satan does not have that. Now, Satan is a powerful angel, and obviously an angel that had enough charisma and ability to impact people and to cause a third of the angels to go to war with God and decide with Lucifer, the Satan, and then eventually be thrown out of heaven. And so we see here they're having to come and make a report of their, even the devil and his fallen angels have access to God right now. It's kind of an interesting situation, because there's no reason to say it's not that way even to right now. We know there'll be a time when that will no longer happen. And so the Lord's going to ask, what you been up to, Satan, basically. And he said, I've been roaming through the earth, walking around it. And we kind of parallels what Peter's going to write in the New Testament when he says that the devil is like a roaring lion. He roams around, or seeking whom he may devour, right? The devil's just kind of going around and seeing what's going on and getting involved wherever he can. And the Lord is going to do something interesting. He's going to point out, he's going to brag on one of the people on earth. He says, have you considered my servant Job? No one on earth is like him, a man of perfect integrity who fears God and turns away from evil. Now, this doesn't mean he was without sin. That doesn't mean there was no sinless perfection, but he was a man who walked in integrity, and he does what is right. He fears the Lord. He does the things that he's supposed to do. And I'm sure when he doesn't, he confesses those things. And so Satan's going to then kind of spurn at this a little bit and says, haven't you put a hedge of protection around him? Haven't you kept any harm from happening to him? And you just bless this man Job. And if you would stretch out your hand and strike everything he owns, he will surely curse you to your face. In other words, he's only following you, God, because he's got the good things in life, because you've blessed him. You take all those things away from him, and he will curse you just like that. And so the Lord says, basically, you're on. Very well. I'm going to remove the hedge of protection from around him. Don't lay a hand on Job himself, but you can do whatever else you want to with any other part of his family, of his livelihood, of anything else he has. Just leave Job himself alone, and we'll see. And so we're going to see that Job is going to have the day of days, the worst. I mean, imagine the worst day you've ever had, when you got the worst news you've ever gotten. All of us have had that day when we get a phone call about a loved one that's died unexpectedly, and it just tears you apart. He's going to lose everything in a matter of minutes, in a matter of hours, and then report it back to him, I guess, in a matter of minutes. But it tells us, and I'm just going to kind of paraphrase here, that it's on just one day. Doesn't tell specifically when, but just one day. Job's sons and daughters are together. They're having this little banquet together that they tend to do quite frequently. And while this is all happening, one of Job's messengers is going to come up, and he's going to report that this group of Sabaeans, basically a group of local raiding people, not good people, evil people, they're going to come down and swoop down, and they're going to take everything. They're going to take all of his oxen away and then kill all the servants except for this one messenger, this one servant who got away. So just like that, all of his oxen are gone and his servants are dead. And then while this one is reporting, another one's going to come up and is going to say, that fire fell from heaven. It says God's fire, probably more than likely lightning of some sort or some type of fire. This was not God, more than likely. This is the devil, because he has the ability to do certain powerful things, especially if God has given him authority. And so this fire is going to come down. It's going to burn up all the sheep and the servants and devour them. In other words, all of his sheep, they're out in the field. And we were told he had like 7,000 of these sheep and goats. They're all destroyed, and all of his shepherds are killed except for one who gets away to tell him. And then as he's finishing up, so that isn't bad enough. One strike, two strike. Then another messenger is going to come and say the Chaldeans. This is the forerunners of what will become the Babylonians. But the Chaldeans, they formed 3 groups of raider bands and made a raid, and they took all your camels and took them away, and they killed all the servants who were watching the camels. I alone have escaped. And then we have a 4th bad report that's going to come in and says, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. Suddenly a wind storm came in from the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed and killed all of your children. And I alone have escaped to tell you. So in a matter of moments, Job hears all your livestock are gone. Pretty much the majority of your servants are gone or dead, and your children are dead. Just like that. So his wealth and his family outside of his wife are all gone. Boom, in a moment. Don't know how I would have taken that. I don't think I would have taken it like Job does here. There's been times when I've responded well to bad news, and there's times I've responded terribly to bad news. And I hate to say it, more often than not, it tends to be on that other end where you kind of go into despair or anger or frustration or shock or whatever it might be. I remember when I got the news a few years ago that my mom had tragically died, just unexpectedly, well, kind of expectedly, but unexpectedly, the timing of it. And it just cut me to the quick. I mean, I just could not believe it that she was gone, and of course I know where she's at. I know I'll see her again one day, but she was gone. Or, with my daughter, I had a daughter at 2.5 that after a battle with leukemia died, and we knew the day was coming, but you're never prepared, right? And when that day came, it was tragic. And that's one of the hardest things ever for a parent to bury their child. I could not imagine losing all of my children. And those who've had that experience, maybe in a car accident or some other tragedy where they've lost all of their children at one time, I can't imagine. It was bad enough losing my daughter. I can't imagine losing 10 children, your daughters and your sons. But notice, Job's going to stand up. He's going to tear his robe. He's going to take a razor and shave his head. This was a common practice, and it just kind of showed your anguish and your humiliation and your suffering of what's happening. He's going to, because your hair was considered your glory, your beard and your hair. So he's going to fall to the ground, and notice what he does. He worships. He fell to the ground and worshiped, saying, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will leave this life. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Throughout all this, Job did not sin or blame God for anything. So instead of worry or whining, he worships. Right? Instead of terror, he testifies. Instead of fear, he has faith. And he has the understanding that everything I have has come from God. If God decides to take it all away, it was his in the first place. Everything that we have, it's a good principle. Everything we have, you didn't get it on your own. God gave you the ability to have whatever it is, and God has blessed you with it. And so he can, if he gives, he can choose in his providence to take it away. That's why we don't place our trust in a large bank account. Nothing wrong with large bank accounts. Nothing wrong with retirements and working hard and taking care of your family. There's none of that. But understanding our trust is in God, not in these material things that are one day going to burn up, or they're going to rot, or they're going to disintegrate one day and turn to dust. And someone else one day is going to have it. It won't be yours forever. But through it all, he's going to bow down before the Lord. He's going to worship the Lord, acknowledging who he is. I came into the world with nothing. I'm going to leave the world with nothing. We have today the same idea. We come in with nothing. But if we know Christ, we know when we die, we take salvation with us, right? And even in this case, he said, at least he's got his robe still with him, so he's not completely naked. And so we see at chapter 1, the tragedy. Now we're going to see kind of the what's the fallout from this. So in chapter 2, that would be bad enough. Chapter 2, Satan didn't get what he wanted. He knew Job was going to curse him, but instead of cursing, he blesses the name of the Lord at the end of the chapter. And so chapter 2, we see it. Here's another time. Satan has come back. He's presenting himself. Same question. Where have you been? I've been roaming about. And then the Lord looks at Satan and says, have you noticed my servant Job, and same idea. No one, he's still got integrity. No one's like him. He fears God. He turns away from evil. He still retains his integrity, even though you incited me against him to destroy him for no good reason. In other words, you led me to allow these things to happen. And Satan's going to answer the Lord skin for skin. In other words, he's only still worshiping you because you didn't do anything to him. If you had done something to him, he said, man will give up everything he owns in exchange for his life. But stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will curse you. In other words, you hurt Job personally on his body, he'll curse you. Or if you threaten him with his own death, he will curse you. And so now all of a sudden, God is going to take away that hedge around Job himself and allow Satan to go directly at Job. So Satan's going to leave the Lord's presence. He doesn't waste any time, and he infects Job with a disease. What the actual disease is, we don't know. We just get symptoms that we read here, and then throughout the rest of the book, we'll read different symptoms. Many people believe it may have been a form of leprosy, but he has boils that are going to bubble up onto his body from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. And he's going to be in terrible pain. And in fact, when we find him after this has happened to him, and this would explain maybe why he's not at home, he's somewhere else, because it tells us that he is sitting in a pile of ashes. More than likely, he's down at the community dump where they would bring all their refuse and burn it, because we don't have like what we have today. So more than likely, he's sitting there at the local dump. And it says he has a piece of broken pottery that he's scraping the sores and the boils to pop the boils and to get relief. I mean, how awful. So he's grieving his children, the death of his children. And now this has happened to him. Now the calamity has fallen on him. And then we have the unfortunate intervention of his wife. Notice the devil doesn't go after his wife. I think because maybe he understood maybe his wife would be a tool in his ability to try to turn Job against God. So his wife's going to come to him. Now be careful. We need to be careful we don't judge her too harshly. But she is going to give some really bad advice here. She says, are you still holding on to your integrity? In other words, are you still doing what's right? Why are you doing that? Why are you fearing God? Why are you doing what's right? God doesn't love you. Look at all the calamity he's brought to you. And she obviously thinks he's going to die from whatever disease he has. It must have been something that they would have considered uncurable. She says, why don't you get out of this world? Curse God and die. In other words, curse God, he'll strike you dead, and at least you'll be out of this world, and at least you'll be at peace, and you won't be in pain and suffering anymore. And again, it can be understood that a wife, remember, it wasn't just Job that lost 10 children. She lost it too. She lost her children. She lost all the things she had. She lost her security. She lost all of these things. And now her husband is sick and probably going to die from whatever disease he has. At least that's her mindset of it. And so she's getting ready to become destitute. So yeah, she's handling it not the way Job handled it. And maybe this is why the devil kept his hand off of her, because he thought he could maybe use her as a way to push Job over the edge. But he's going to respond properly to it. He says, you speak as a foolish woman speaks. Now, he's not saying you are a fool. He's saying you speak like a foolish woman. In other words, you know better than this. And sometimes when we're angry, or we're in a situation, or we're in grief or whatever, we'll say things sometimes that we know better than, but we just speak out of our hurt. And maybe that's what's going on here. And he's going to ask the question, should we accept only good from God and not adversity? And again, it's going to say through all of this, Job did not sin. In other words, if we're willing to take the blessing from the Lord, are we not willing to take some adversity? Because there will be adversity. There will be trials. Anybody that tells you if you come to Christ and you're a Christian and you follow God, you'll never be sick, and you'll never be poor, and you'll never go without, and you'll only live the blessed life, and you'll only live it now, and you just got to have enough faith, and all these kinds of hogwash. That's an old saying my dad would say, hogwash, right? It's garbage. That's not the truth. That's not the truth. Do some people have blessings in their life? Yeah. But we all go through trials. We all go through sufferings. All of us. It's through the trials and the tribulations that we go through that we grow. If we never had bad times, would we ever know what a good time is? Would we ever know blessing if we didn't occasionally know curse? Would we know, what it means to be blessed with financial resource if we never had scarcity of resource? So these things happen, and it's because God's working his will and way in our lives. That's where trust comes in. When sometimes and I'm not saying it's easy. It's not easy. It's hard. There's times you just cry yourself to sleep at night. There's times when you wake up or you can't even sleep because you're in such a thing about whatever may be going on. But notice, instead of all of that worry and all of that despondency, even though he's going to show some of that here in a minute, he doesn't sin. He doesn't blame God for it. He doesn't curse it. He's like, If this is God's, in other words, if it's God's will to bless me, and it's God's will right now for me to lose it all for His glory, that's okay. And so then we see at the end of chapter 2, Job's going to have 3 friends that come, and initially it's a good thing. We're going to see that they prove to be somewhat foolish friends, but they're going to come. We see Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, these 3 different friends, and they're going to come when they hear about Job, just to be with Job. And they sit down with Job. They have the ash on their head. They tear their robe. They're going to weep. They're joining Job in his grieving, and they sit on the ground with Job. Job's there in the ashes, grieving and mourning and going through all this pain. And in fact, it says they didn't even recognize Job at first when they first saw him because he was in such bad shape. But they sit there for 7 days and 7 nights and never say a word. Sometimes the best thing you can do when somebody's grieving or somebody's hurting or somebody's going through something, maybe they've got a diagnosis or a sickness, sometimes it's just best to be present, but be quiet. Because sometimes even in our best intentions, we can sometimes add pain to a situation by giving our input. Sometimes there is a time for good words, but sometimes there's something about just being there with somebody and helping and walking through that with them without even saying a word. And so some people have that ability to do it. We should have that ability as part of comforting those who need to be comforted and grieving with those who grieve, right? And then chapter 3, we see Job is going to make a speech. And again, in this speech, he never blames God, but he is going to question some things. And the main thing he's going to question is he's going to curse. He said, I curse the day I was ever born. I curse the day may the day I was born perish in the night that said a boy is conceived. In other words, even his very conception with his parents, he curses. Why? In other words, if this is what life is if I'm going to have to go through this, why was I ever even born? It's kind of the George Bailey It's a Wonderful Life idea. I've made my life doesn't mean anything. Everybody would be better off if I'd never been born. I'm sure some of us have said that. I know I have said that from time to time myself. I just be honest and transparent. There've been times I've said, my family, my wife, my kids, they'd be better off with somebody else. Whatever. And you get despondent. You get that way. It's easy to get that way when you get your eyes off the Lord, get your eyes out of the Word, and to get your eyes on yourself. And we see right here, he is doing that to a degree. And he talks about the darkness and the gloom and the cloud and just all these dark things that he's feeling. He's experiencing what some have termed as the dark night of the soul, when you just have so much pain and grief that you're dealing with. And, in other words, all around him, all he sees is darkness. He sees no light. He sees no light at the end of the tunnel. We see a mention of a beast by the name of Leviathan. We'll hear that mentioned again. Leviathan is some type of a sea creature or sea dragon that may have existed back then or prior to it. Could have been a dinosaur for all we know. Don't know. But and then he's going to question, why was I not even stillborn? Why did my mother not just miscarry with me? Again, why was I allowed to nurse at my mom's breast? Why do all these things? Why couldn't I have just been born dead so that I could be at peace and sleep with my fathers? Then I would be all the other people. It's just very dark. Wise light given to one burdened with grief, and life to those whose existence is bitter, who wait for death, but it does not come. In other words, he's ready to die. Lord, just take me. I'm ready, but it won't happen. We see that in time. We're going to see that again at the end of times. The book of Revelation describes a time when people run to the mountains and hope that the mountains will fall on them, but they cannot die, because they're going through some form of judgment and such. And Job's going through this. God's not done with Job yet. So his purpose isn't done yet. So therefore he has to endure. And that's what this book is all about, enduring. Just as Paul tells the young boy Timothy, his preacher boy Timothy, that we're to endure hardness as a soldier. We have to endure. There's endurance. We have to push for the mark. We have to do those things. It's not always easy. And so we see his just saying, why God had a hedge around me. Why has he removed it? When food is put before me, my groans pour out like water. In other words, I don't even want to eat anything. I'm sick to my stomach. Fear has overtaken me. I've dreaded that this might happen to me and that is, it's common. People that have a lot sometimes will worry about what happens if it's all gone, right? I heard the story one time told about Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, the very wealthy, at one point, I think the richest man in America. And he noticed one time, I assume this is true, I'm going to pass it off as it is. But he saw one of a construction worker one time working on one of the skyscrapers that Rockefeller owned, and he saw this guy sit down, and he got out his lunch, and that his wife had obviously packed for him. He eats it, and he sits there and just eats it so peacefully. And he turned to somebody and he said, "I would give anything. I would give all the money I have to be able to sit down and enjoy a meal just like that." Because his stomach was so eat up with ulcers from all the years of hard work and worry and fretting over things, that he was eaten up with ulcers. He couldn't even enjoy food any longer. And so then we get to the end of chapter 4. So, Job has spoken. He's in his dark night of the soul. Eliphaz, one of his friends, is going to speak. And again, I'm going to kind of paraphrase this a little bit, but he's going to give Job right. What he's going to say, a lot of it is right. It's just not the right way to interpret it with Job's situation. He's going to say, "Should anyone try to speak to you when you're exhausted? Yet who can keep from speaking?" In other words, we've been here long enough. We've waited 7 days. Now you're talking. And by the way, 7 days was the appropriate amount of time for mourning after a loved one had died. So maybe that's why the 7 days there. They were waiting for that mourning period to be over with. But Job has spoken, and now his friends are going to feel the okay for them to speak, and says, your words have steadied the one who was stumbling. But now that this has happened to you, you have become exhausted. In other words, your words used to be the one that would encourage people that were going through tough things. Now you're the one going through the tough things, and your words aren't helping you. And then he's going to make these kind of comparisons that, in other words, he's going to basically get to the point of saying, Job, you have to have done something wrong. God has brought this on you, this judgment on you, let you go through this because there's some sin somewhere that you've committed that you need to make right. And he talks about these things. And he says, can a mortal be righteous before God? Can a man be more pure than his maker? If God puts no trust in his servants, and he charges his angels with foolishness, how much more those who dwell in clay houses, whose foundation is in the dust, who are crushed like a moth? And so he's saying, who are we as men? And we're smashed to pieces. But the overall thing is, you've helped other people. Now you're in this distress. You can't help yourself. We've got to get to the heart of the matter. And so as we get to chapter 5, it says, will anyone answer you? Which of the holy ones will turn to you? For anger kills a fool and jealousy slays the gullible. And we're going to see again, he's going to continue to tell them that man born of woman is full of turmoil, but humans are born for trouble as sure as sparks fly upward. As sure as when you're burning something, sparks fly up. Every man is born to trouble. And he's going to say, if I were you, I would appeal to God and would present my case to him. He does great things. That all sounds good, right? Because he says he sends the rain. He sets the lowly on high. He frustrates the schemes of the crafty. He traps the what? So he's saying all these things about God. He's talking about he saves the needy from their sharp words. He helps those with the injustice, the poor. How happy is the person whom God corrects? So again, he's saying, Job, why are you being so stubborn? You're going through all this because God is trying to correct you because you've done some sin that you need to correct. Now, remember, what did we get told both chapter 1 and chapter 2? And none of this did Job ever sin. God is he's not being punished or being put through this because of some sin. He's being put through this for God's purpose, so that God ultimately would be glorified through it, that we would have an example of what it means for a godly person to go through suffering, right? So he's got a plan and a purpose to bring Job out a different person than he went through at the beginning of this. And so in other words, so you should seek God's correction. You should seek him out. Don't reject his discipline. Don't fight against it. If you'll just turn to the Lord, if you'll just do that, then all of this will go away. And of course, we know that's generally good advice. But in this situation, it's the wrong advice. And we're going to see later on that, in fact, God is going to reproach Eliphaz for this commentary, for what he's saying. He says, all of these things you'll approach. And then he starts to tell him, if you'll just do this, then God will give you back everything that you had, and you'll approach the grave in full vigor. You'll come out of this. You'll be healed, and you'll die an old man. And we've investigated this, and it's true. Hear it and understand it yourself. They're trying to buoy what they're saying to him. They're trying to make what they're saying sound good. And it does sound good. And generally speaking, it is true. There's truth to it. But it's not the right advice for Job at this time. That's not the right thing to be saying to Job. And in fact, they're coming as his friends trying to claim. And in fact, Eliphaz is going to say that he even got some of this through a vision and in a dream. More than likely it was not God talking to him. If this actually happened, more than likely Satan may have been speaking to him. We don't know, or maybe he was just making this a statement to try to give a little more, gravitas to what he's saying. But the bottom line is his friends are speaking to him. Their first advice to them is going to be and normally if there was sin, and we know we've talked about that a lot, when people sin and they're called on their sin, yes, we need to confess and we need to find forgiveness and repentance. But that's not the case here with Job. That's not why these things are happening, and they're not really showing good wisdom in figuring this out. And it's going to be the same idea that we even see in the New Testament. The blind man that Jesus heals, they're going to say, what sin did he or his parents committed that made him blind? Because they believed that any kind of physical malady or any kind of bad things happen to you, there must be sin in your life. And yeah, can there be times when God will punish because of our sin as a correcting? Sure. But it's not formulaic. I think what you kind of see with Eliphaz is he's trying to say that there's a formula. God's got all this and God does this. And when you do wrong, if you'll just do this, then everything will be set back right and God will start blessing you again. And that's not knowing the mind of God. We're to pray as Jesus prayed, not my will, but your will be done. We don't always know what God's will is outside of what he's revealed in Scripture. We don't know what he's working behind the scenes. That's why we have to trust him. We trust him. We obey him. We understand that even when things are great and when things are terrible and awful as they are for Job, that we have to trust and not despair, even though it's not always easy to do that. And so we're going to pick up tomorrow, chapter 6. Job is going to reply back to Eliphaz. And he's basically going to say, as if my grief wasn't bad enough, now you've come in here making it all my fault. This is all my fault that all these things are happening. And have you ever had that when you're just feeling bad about something and then somebody says something, maybe it's truthful, but it's not the right time to hear that kind of, and it's, it's kind of your fault. You wouldn't be going through the situation if you hadn't done this. I have done that before. I've done that before with my wife sometimes. Something happens, let's say the car, she decides to go somewhere that I said, maybe you shouldn't go to that. And she goes and the car breaks down or something happens to the car. We hit a deer or whatever. And that's never happened to her. It's happened to me multiple times. And then what am I thought? If you had only not gone, that wouldn't have happened, right? As if there's a direct correlation there. That something was going to happen more than likely, not to be fatalistic or anything, but sometimes we'll say, well, maybe that's true, but that's not the time to say something like that. That's a very stupid thing to say at that time. That's not helpful. That's hurtful. And so there's times for hard truth, and there's times when maybe a little more understanding of what a person's going through and a little more compassion and consideration. And maybe there would have been a better way of saying, Joe, this is all bad. And we know you've lost everything. And if you just get your life right, then it would all go back the way it was. Well, unfortunately, it's not that easy. And we're going to see that as we go through the rest of this book. So strap in. We've got a few days to go on this. This book has well over 30 chapters in it. And as we see we'll see Job's response tomorrow, some more conversation going on. Again, the rest of this book is primarily speeches and conversation. And we'll see how they begin to work through all of this. And from that, we can learn and understand how we need to deal with it when the storms of life hit us. Hopefully not like Job, where you lose everything all in one afternoon. But you prepare yourself for that possibility by being in God's Word, spending in daily communion and fellowship with Him. So when the storms of life come, because guess what? It's going to come. And I think I said this earlier today in the other video, that basically you're either in the valley, coming out of the valley, or you're getting ready to go into the valley. That's life. That's just how it is. We all have those seasons of difficult times. So God bless you. Thank you for joining. Hopefully that helped a little bit and give a little context to what we're talking about. And because some of these passages can be a little hard because they are just a lot of dialogue. But we'll try to just give general concepts for them. So God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow for Job chapter 6. See you then.